My name is Grant, and when my wife tried to divorce me a week after I inherited my late mother's estate, she figured she was making the smartest move of her life. She assumed grief would cloud my judgment, the paperwork would favor her, and the court would split everything down the middle by default. What she didn't know was that my mother had planned further ahead than either of us realized, and that the moment she chose to strike was the moment every one of her assumptions would collapse. I met Miranda 9 years ago when we were both in our mid-20s, equal parts ambition and uncertainty, trying to assemble adult lives with more hope than instruction. The connection was easy. No forced charm, no breathless chase, just conversations that ran long enough to make bills late, and a kind of chemistry that made busy rooms disappear. We wanted the same broad strokes then. Build something steady, be good to each other, keep our eyes up for what might become possible next. Those first years were stitched together by small, bright moments, the kind that convince you you've chosen well, and that the future is simply a longer run of the present. The first time I brought Miranda to meet my mom, I saw something I didn't have a name for yet. My mother wasn't rude, and she wasn't theatrical about concern. She was all warm manners and careful questions. After the door closed, though, she sat with me and said a sentence that wouldn't stop echoing. "I know you're in love, Grant, but time will decide how well this goes." She held my eyes the way only a mother can, like she was watching the future happen in the space between us. She didn't accuse Miranda of anything, didn't call me naive or reckless. She just said, "I don't hate her, but you're my only child, and I need you to move with your eyes open." I filed it under maternal caution and told myself she was protecting the child in me, not judging the woman beside me. We didn't rush into marriage. We dated a few years before we stood in front of people and said promises in a voice that didn't shake. When we finally married, I thought we were ready, and I thought my mother's reserve would soften. It didn't sour. It stayed cordial and cold, an unspoken truce that never turned into closeness. Mom didn't interfere. She respected my choices without pretending to approve of all of them. She watched from a distance and never tried to edit our life from the sidelines. I told myself, not every in-law bond turns into tea and secrets, and that civility was good enough. The first married years were steady learning to live in each other's orbits without crashing, making taste compromises small enough to forget, and arguing just rarely enough to believe we were doing it right. I'd been in a safe corporate role for years, predictable money, predictable days, and a growing itch that I was going to spend my best hours building someone else's wins. 2 years into the marriage, I made the jump. I left my job to start an agency. It wasn't a blind leap. I'd saved, modeled, recruited a tiny team, and mapped a 12-month runway that felt conservative. For a while, we kept speed. Then one of my people made a critical error on a flagship account. The misstep was public enough to stain our name and precise enough to make us look sloppy. We didn't just lose one anchor client, and we lost 2. Together, they were more than half our revenue. Losing them felt like someone had pulled the floorboards off the joists. I tried to hold posture and rebuild. I rewrote our pitch, booked meetings back to back, reopened old doors, and chased any lead worth a morning. Cash flow went from tight to thin. The firm went into limp mode, still moving, but only because momentum hadn't fully bled out yet. Each week the balance fell. Each night I tried to read numbers like a language that would suddenly translate into good news. 2 months of white-knuckle management leaked into home, because bills don't pause out of respect, and refrigerators don't fill themselves on intention. I kept the lights on and the rent current as long as I could, and when I couldn't, I said so. Miranda's patience evaporated. She'd remind me how I'd left a perfectly fine job to chase a business she now labeled a fantasy, and then a failure. When she helped with money, it came with speeches long enough to be invoices on their own. Part of me understood. Fear makes cruelty sound practical. What left a mark wasn't the frustration, it was the speed with which we became you. The truth is, we'd already started drifting before money went missing. The finances just widened surface cracks into a visible fracture line. Communication shrank to logistics. Warmth became habit. A house turned into a divided territory with shared utilities. I kept trying to triage, to solve it alone, to prove I could drag what I'd broken back to whole. Then I went to my mother. Pride pays for nothing, and funerals in the rear view had taught me that silence isn't bravery. It's isolation with a flattering name. I told her everything, the client losses, the runway that had shortened, the attempts I'd made, and the math that didn't hold. I braced for a lecture I had earned. She listened. Then she stood, opened a drawer, returned with a folder, and said, "Take this. Make it count." It was enough to steady the ship, bring on temporary consultants to cover gaps, rebuild systems that had been more ambition than architecture, and buy time long enough for better work to land. It wasn't a magic trick, but it turned panic into possibility. In the months that followed, smaller clients arrived. No one as big as what I'd lost, but enough to turn the weekly dread into a plan that could be executed without pretending. The business was healing slowly. The marriage wasn't. Money stress had exposed how far we'd drifted. Relief didn't sew the distance shut. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was about grocery lists and schedule edges. We ate in the same room without looking up. We slept in the same bed, like guests assigned to the same space by a glitch. I tried to pull threads. Conversations kept breaking in my hands. We both felt the fracture and decided, without deciding, not to address it. Then my mother called and asked me to come by. Her voice was soft, and there was a seriousness in it I hadn't heard since my father died. She told me she had ovarian cancer. It wasn't new. It was advanced. The treatments weren't taking, and the doctors had asked her to stop planning in years and start organizing in months. The room went quiet in a way sound can't correct. My mother had been my constant for 12 years after my father. She was the ground I walked on, even when the road looked like a map I hadn't read. Telling me to prepare to let go was like telling me the house would remain, but the foundation was being repossessed. The next weeks were a loop of hospital hallways and waiting rooms, and the kind of conversations you have when both parties know what you can't say out loud yet. I told Miranda everything. She was sympathetic at first, right phrases, careful gestures, and then her presence thinned. She visited a few times, and then said work was overwhelming, or that hospitals depressed her more than she could manage. I didn't press. They'd never been close, and I didn't have extra energy to turn disappointment into conflict. 2 months later, my mother's body gave up. Even with a calendar that had circled the date without writing it down, I wasn't ready. She told me for years that she wanted no spectacle, no flights, no eulogies longer than a paragraph, no Baroque farewell. She wanted to be buried quickly and quietly. I did exactly that. The day after she died, I buried her and stood over fresh dirt, while a pastor spoke, thinking, how do you keep moving when the person who taught you how is no longer here to insist? Grief sat on me like a coat I couldn't take off. A week later, her lawyer called and asked me to stop by. I assumed paperwork, death certificates, account closures, a list of calls to make with a voice steady enough not to spook people. He opened a thick file and explained that before her health turned, my mother had restructured everything. She had placed her assets into a trust. I'd heard the word. I didn't know how it worked. He spoke plainly. A trust is a locked box assets go in, and only the key holder under specific conditions can open it. I was the only beneficiary. No cousins, no charities, no secondary clauses with surprises. But it wasn't a pile of money with a green light. It was a plan designed to protect me from timing, from predation, and from my own worst impulses. The most important clause set a 3-year stability period. During those 3 years, the trust stayed sealed. No distributions beyond what the trust instrument explicitly allowed. And if I filed for divorce, if a divorce was in process, or if I was divorced during that window, my spouse would be completely and permanently cut off from the trust. No direct access, no indirect avenue, no negotiation, no creative lawyering. Courts couldn't reach it. Mediation couldn't claim it. Nothing commingled because nothing could be. The inheritance wasn't marital property. It wasn't even in my hands. I remember holding the folder and asking myself questions I didn't want to answer. Did she distrust Miranda? Did she distrust me? Was she protecting the money or the son? Then I remembered who she was. Quiet, careful, disinterested in boasting, and always 2 moves ahead. She'd shielded me the way you shield someone you love when you can't be present to do it in person. I left that office in a fog and told Miranda that my mother had left me an inheritance. I didn't mention the trust. I didn't say stability period. I didn't describe the clause that would become the hinge of everything that followed. She barely looked up from her phone. "All that paperwork," she said. "Your mom was so organized." At the time, I told myself that grief makes people awkward. Now, I know better. 2 weeks later, a process server walked into my office, asked for me by name, and handed me an envelope with a sentence I'll never forget. "You've been served." Inside was a petition for dissolution of marriage irreconcilable differences. No warning conversation. No intervention attempt. No, "We need to talk" on a Tuesday night. Just a choice, signed and stamped. At home, I asked why. She said, "We've grown apart. Let's be adults about it," like it was a decision to change gyms. After that, the divorce process did what divorces do. It dragged and billed and turned human pain into procedural language. In mediation, Miranda's lawyer came in hot. He demanded 50% half of all present and future marital assets. Future was the word he paused on, as if it were a magic trick. They assumed future caught the inheritance. I hadn't told her about the trust because I didn't think I had to, and because not telling felt less like a strategy and more like a boundary. The trust wasn't mine to spend. It was a structure with rules my mother had written to outlast her. When the trust came up formally, my lawyer brought everything. He laid the instrument on the table, walked through the clauses, and explained why the assets were not and could not be part of the marital estate. He pointed out that nothing had been deposited into joint accounts, nothing had been spent, nothing had been converted into anything the court could plausibly call shared. He read the stability clause slowly. I watched Miranda's face change in real time. Her lawyer flipped pages forward and back, then leaned into his chair and said the kind of sentence lawyers say when math trumps feelings. "We should reconsider our position." They had no leverage. She had fired too early and at the wrong target, assuming a system that didn't exist would carry her where she wanted to go. The divorce finalized about a year after she filed. Without the inheritance, the settlement reflected only what we actually had together. There wasn't much left. Lawyers had eaten a good portion of it. She called me selfish, said I was evil, said my mother, and I had planned this to cheat her. I didn't match volume. I matched memory. When I first heard those clauses, I said, I thought my mom had gone too far. Now I understand she knew something I refused to believe. She saw what you would do. She protected me from it. That was our last real conversation. Months after the decree, she messaged late one night. She said she was drowning in debt and didn't know who else to call. For a moment, the old muscle twitched, the instinct to step in and lift. Then I remembered the timeline and the paperwork and the choice she'd made while I was burying my mother. I'm sorry you're going through this, I wrote back, but I can't save you. I truly wish you well. That was the last time we spoke. Looking back, gratitude covers more than it used to. The warning in my mother's eyes when I couldn't see it, the hurt that sharpened my vision, the silence that taught me the difference between peace and the absence of noise. I lost my mother and my marriage in the same season. Grief rearranged the furniture in every room inside me, but it also woke me up to something I would have missed if life had stayed easy. Love demands open eyes and protection. When offered by people who've already survived what you're walking into, is not control. It is care, written in a language you only learn to read when you need it. Thanks for listening.